the Department of Public Instruction. Very excited today to introduce Dr. Aaron Fisher. Dr. Fisher is the D. Endowed Professor of School Psychology and Adjunct Assistant Professor of Psychiatry and Director of the Huntsman Mental Health Institute Home Program, Interdisciplinary Pediatric Feeding Disorders Clinic at the University of Utah. He's a licensed psychologist and licensed board certified behavior analyst. He's worked with individuals with social, emotional, and behavioral problems and their families for over 15 years. His research focuses on the intersection of technology, behavior, and mental health, and specifically telehealth and teleconsultation supports. So we're real glad to be able to bring this to you today. You'll see in the chat a couple of things before Dr. Fisher gets started that our presentation today is being recorded and will be later available on the DPI website. And that if you have questions as the presentation goes along, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat and find some good times to pause Dr. Fisher and pose those questions that you have as they come up. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and let Dr. Fisher get started.
Thanks so much, Tim. I appreciate the intro and welcome everyone. Good morning. It's great to see you all. Thanks for inviting me out to come hang out with you all this morning. We have a packed 2 hours ahead of us. There's a lot of content I want to share with you, but I'm also really interested in you all being engaged. I'm very comfortable with you all having your cameras off. I think there's a lot we'll talk about when it comes to engagement, and it's not just being able to have a camera on, but I'm interested in your reactions, your feedback, your participation. So use the chat. Please ask all your questions. Tim is going to be my co-pilot this morning, and so if there's anything that's pressing, he's going to stop me so we can jump in. I'll also reserve some time for kind of more open Q&A, where if you're feeling brave and you want to unmute your microphone, turn your video on and jump in, we'll have some time for that as well. Throughout today's presentation, what's really important for me is that I leave you all with a few new skills. And I think it's really important, particularly in the time we're at, where we're moving so much to virtual supports online because of the pandemic, that we really know how to do these things ourselves. So I'm going to do some more incidental teaching opportunities with you all this morning, and hopefully you'll engage with me and jump in. It'll make it a lot more fun, I promise. I'm going to turn my my view to just one small square, so I won't be able to see you all. But like I said, if you need anything, just jump in and Tim will help support. So today we're going to be talking about telemental health supports to engage online learners during the pandemic, which we're still well in, and beyond. And I think this is really exciting because the work that we've learned we can do during this time, there are real applications to this as we move forward. I would be remiss if I didn't start my presentation talking about the amazing group of people that I get to work with at the University of Utah. We have a lab, the University of Utah Technology and Training, Education and Consultation Lab, and it's through our school psychology program in the College of Ed here at the University of Utah. This was our annual lab photo, which of course we had to do through Zoom. And we do a lot of great work in our local community and across the state around multi-tiered systems of support for school mental health, for behavioral consultation. We run a few integrated day treatment programs. We provide professional development as well as behavior supports and teleconsultation at large. And one of the new projects that we're really excited to kick off, and I know that you all are doing similar work in Wisconsin, is around school mental health technical assistance and training to do alignment of services, but also to bridge the gap between community and school-based providers. So that's something that we're jumping into in collaboration with the Huntsman Mental Health Institute this next year. And also a big shout out to our partners, these districts you see here, who have funded all of this work and who see the value of doing a variety of these services with students in their districts. Okay, so what are we going to learn about today? Well, let me get you oriented. We're going to talk about online telehealth service delivery so you can kind of understand it in the same way I do. I've been doing this work since 2012, so a long time before everyone had to do this work. And I'm grateful for that experience because it's given me the opportunity to share some of what I've learned with folks like you and others who I think can really benefit from the service delivery modality. We're also going to discuss the importance of online engagement, especially for your work. If you're thinking about doing individual therapy, group therapy, or even teleconsultation through a telehealth format, it's really important that you can get people to be engaged. And so, you already saw me jump in this morning and set some expectations about what I'm hoping for our training, for our workshop this morning. And we kind of have to do similar things with our students. And sometimes it takes time. I don't have the ability this morning to build a long-standing relationship with you all. I wish I could, because I think we could do some really cool work. But I think it's really important to consider the online engagement piece. We're also going to talk about applications of your work. So you're thinking, what can I do in these sessions? What's a way to get engagement? What's a way that I can get the rapport built and deliver therapeutic services? We'll also talk about some of those practice considerations. And these are going to be things like legal and ethical issues, best practice stuff, like what your room should look like. So we're going to get into some of the really fine-tuned details. So bear with me if we go through that, especially if you might know some of those. And then of course, we'll have some time for a Q&A at the end. Okay, so our first activity for this morning, and this is going to be threaded throughout, is using an engagement tool called Mentimeter. And so what I'm going to do is copy and paste in the chat the information that you see right now on the screen. So if folks want to just easily copy and paste that, what I'd like for you to do is go to that website, and I'm going to share my screen so you can see more about what I see. Okay, so our first question for the day, how are y'all feeling today? And remember, when you're giving this response, you can have more than one feeling at once. We don't live in these dichotomous spaces, or at least we should try not to. It's okay if you're feeling kind of happy, maybe a little bit exhausted, maybe you had a tough morning, feeling a little bit angry or sad, worried about the future. I'd love to hear how you all are doing. Great, thanks for folks who are jumping in. Great, we have about a third of folks responding so far. I really appreciate it. That's a really good response rate. Getting closer to about half now. And if you're following with me, I'm looking at the bottom right of my screen. That kind of ticker keeps going up as people keep jumping in. Thanks, everyone. Y'all are doing great. All right. So it looks like for the most part, people are feeling pretty good today. Some exhaustion. I get that. I feel like I'm living in this perpetual space of exhaustion where my bucket is definitely more full than it was. I feel like a year ago or a little over a year ago. But it's great to hear that folks are doing pretty good. All right, let me switch back to our other screen so you can keep following along with me. When I talk about school-based telehealth, there's a lot that comes to mind for me. And I'm not sure if it resonates in the same way for you. So I want to start by getting you oriented with what I mean by school-based telehealth. These can be things like using telephone, smartphone, just having the kind of standard interaction that maybe you would have before the pandemic. You weren't using video, pick up the phone and talk to someone. You may also use email. I imagine most of you use email, and frequently, and maybe it's the bane of many of your existence. And I know email is always a tough thing to manage for me. That's a great way to communicate with people though, especially if you're thinking of an asynchronous form of communication. Another one I think we should consider is SMS or text messaging. This is one that I frequently use with my own team, but particularly with individuals that I work with in schools. If it's educators I'm consulting with, if I'm maybe connecting in the community with providers or family, I'm probably for the most part trying to use text message for quick information. If it's more private or if it's gonna need some more security, I think email is typically the one I go back to. But I like to have everything written down. And if you're with me as a consultant and you kind of doing this work, you know, documentation, I mean, across the board, but particularly consultation is key. And so having these forms of communication that we can use is really helpful. I also want you to think about things like mobile apps or mHealth. These are becoming increasingly more prevalent in practices, whether it be integrated behavioral health or seeing this as far as treatment options or supports. And so I'd really consider these types of options also fit into the telehealth framework. What we're using right now, video conferencing, this is the bread and butter of telehealth work. For me, particularly in the work that I've done, it's about these face-to-face moments that we have with people. That's going to be really important. And let me kind of set some of the rhetoric on the front end around how we should talk about some of these things. And this is my personal preference. And so people may disagree, and I'm happy to have a conversation. When I'm connecting with you all right now, we are face-to-face. Your face is on one end, my face is on the other. And depending on how your screen is oriented, my face might be really big or it might be really small in the corner. That piece is really important because we're able to approximate eye contact. We're able to see facial gestures. It's really important. If we're talking about doing services traditionally, we would call that in person. And sometimes I see some of the semantics switch, but I think it's important if we want to show the value of this work that we consider this actually being a face-to-face way of consulting and doing direct service delivery. You may also use distance education. I know teachers you probably work with do. We use Canvas here at the University of Utah, but any kind of learning management system, that's also telehealth. You could put asynchronous content on there to do a lot of great work. So I think that's a really important consideration. And then something that's really more of a budding area within the work we're doing when it comes to training, when it comes to telehealth supports for coaching and really modeling a lot of things and getting performance feedback within sort of simulated scenarios. Virtual and augmented realities are going to be increasingly more prevalent in the next 10 to 20 years. And we're going to see that as a tool we can use to really get skills up to certain levels of competency. So I'm really excited about that. That's some of the work that we're doing in our lab. And there's other folks across the country who are really starting to see the value of simulated learning environments, including virtual reality. So I'm interested, as we're jumping in this morning, in what ways have you all used telehealth in your practice? It's going to be the same link as before. I'm going to switch my screen so you can all follow along with me. And let me switch this one slide. Here we go. In what ways have you used telehealth in your practice? And let me give you all a couple of minutes to hear about this. This could be broadly IP meetings, individual care, teleconsultation, maybe more unique coaching opportunities. Try to be as specific as you can, but I'm interested to hear what you all have done in your practice, maybe before the pandemic, but particularly this past year. Excellent. Thanks for folks who are jumping in. These little boxes will start to scroll and you'll be able to see other people's responses as we go in. A lot of really great applications. You all are really steeped in this work, doing a lot of kind of your day-to-day or trying to adapt your day-to-day to make this work with students and families and teams. Very, very cool to see. Great. I'm seeing some other more direct service stuff like small group. Also, it sounds like in some of the descriptions, maybe things like virtual check and check out with students, which I'm a big fan of. I have the pleasure of collaborating here with my colleague, Leanne Hawken, who has done a lot of work with check and check out, and we've been really interested in the virtual application of that work. I'm seeing about 33 folks have jumped in. Thank you all. I really appreciate that. These are great examples. And I love how folks are thinking about this. Like we talked about some of the maybe less traditional thought of telehealth things, email, text, things like that, but also some of these service deliveries as well. Cool, I like this one. I created a Bitmoji office for students. That's awesome. Y'all are really diving into it. I love that. My son's kindergarten teacher has gotten really interested in the Bitmoji classroom, and it really makes things a little bit more kind of welcoming and fun. I know my kindergarten really likes it, and I personally do too. All right, well, let me switch back to the other screen. We'll keep this going in case folks are still responding. As we continue through today, we're going to talk a lot about security and privacy and things like that, but I want to start by mentioning HIPAA and FERPA compliance as being sort of this very top of the umbrella of services that we can deliver. And it really should be seen as the gate through which we are providing services. So we know that privacy, confidentiality, security of data for our students through FERPA, and if we're thinking of more health settings through HIPAA, these things are critical because if information is released or gets out or has the ability to be held in certain ways, for asking for money for data, things like that. I mean, there's some real issues. And so we have to do our due diligence. We have to be vigilant to make sure that all of the software we're using, all of these tools that I'll talk about today are vetted and approved by the districts that you all work in. And many of your districts have probably already done this. And in some ways they may say, we don't use this software, no, and we use this one. And I think that they're doing their due diligence to keep everyone safe and secure. So we really need to consider those things, but also advocate for really robust telehealth software and technologies that can really help us. So that's sort of the overarching piece I want to talk about. We'll jump into this a little bit more, but I really want to set that stage. So as we jump in today, and as we're thinking about telehealth services broadly, I want to talk about the two that I mentioned earlier on. One being more direct service telehealth, and the other one being indirect telehealth-based services. And this visual hopefully will help kind of break it down a little bit. We'll dive in a little bit more to really talk about services as we go. When I'm talking about direct service provision, I'm talking about you being the provider on one end, like me, and then the purple circles, you all on the other end, receiving some service. So if we have many purple circles, you're probably doing some virtual group type supports. Maybe it's small social emotional groups or social skills groups. If you're working with older students, maybe you're doing ACT-based groups or brief ACT-based groups, or even some types of skill-based groups like dialectical behavior therapy. If you're doing individual services, it's going to look to the image to the right of that kind of group section where I'm the blue dot, the blue circle, and you're the purple circle. And we're doing direct face-to-face telehealth services mediated through the technology. Let's look on the right side of the screen. These indirect services, these are going to be things where I'm the blue circle, I'm working with you all, green circle, let's call that teacher, educator, specialist within the school, some related service provider, trying to change outcomes for a client, which is your student. This also could be families that you're working with, help their own children. And you'll notice there's that dotted line between the blue circle and the purple. In a contemporary teleconsultation model, we're not just relying on information that we're getting from our consultees, we're also really trying to get eyes on and verify some of these discussions, as well as the behaviors or circumstances that are reported throughout this process. So this is kind of orients us as our conversation goes today. And as we flow through, there'll be time we dive into each, both direct and indirect. There's another piece I really want to bring up as we're giving context to telehealth in schools and the services you can provide, and that's synchronous service delivery versus asynchronous service delivery. Think of the synchronous stuff as the live, all those maybe dreaded Zoom calls you're on all day. I know there's some really long days where folks are in meetings a lot. Those are the synchronous live moments. And those are also the times where you might be providing direct services. They can be really powerful, having that face-to-face interaction. We've seen though during the pandemic that accessibility, we may have the technology, we may have internet, those things may be impacted or may not. We'll talk more about that later. But there may be other circumstances, multiple individuals at the home, maybe multiple people using the internet, and the synchronous work maybe doesn't always resonate with folks, or it's not always available. So we should also think about asynchronous service delivery. That would be things like self-paced content or things that you record, or that families record, or that educators record, that you can view or anyone can view at their convenience and get information and maybe interact with you asynchronously. So I'm a really big fan of asynchronous content. I think that the synchronous stuff, we've shown that there's value to it. We see it this year, but there's a lot more that I think we can do from an asynchronous fashion. And I don't even think we've really scratched the surface. I'll spend a little bit of time giving some of my thoughts about asynchronous service delivery and what we've done through our lab, and maybe getting you some ideas about how robust this really could be, the combination of both synchronous and asynchronous. So let's think about that differentiation, especially as we go through this morning. As we talk about engagement, as we talk about this idea of getting people engaged, I really want to orient you to this manuscript. This was an article from a couple years ago, and 2015, and it was measuring student engagement in technology-mediated learning. And this is a review article. This is the table from the article. And I am a really big fan of how they broke this down. And I use this to really help guide my perspective as I'm trying to provide really robust individual direct or group services, as well as consultative supports. So on the first column on that left side, these are the different indicator categories of what did we talk about as far as engagement. There's behavioral, there's cognitive engagement, there's emotional engagement. I really appreciate this first one. I appreciate all of them, but I particularly appreciate the behavioral one because these are the things that we do in schools. We're looking at overt behaviors, things that we can collect information on that are indicative of student success and positive student outcomes. And so things like answers to questions, completed assignments, attendance in class, although particularly during the pandemic, we have to be extremely flexible and understanding and compassionate towards people and unique circumstances. And so these types of metrics could provide some inequities, particularly the attendance one. Attention, how we might define some of those things. If you've ever done, your systematic direct observation in a classroom, you may have your on task, you may have your disruptive, and you may have this more inattentive, like passive off task. You could have things like, are your eyes on the device, the frequency of logins, number or quality frequency of posts, different ways of really just engaging. For me, I always tell my students, give me thumbs up, give me the emojis that Zoom offer. I love to see those things. Also thinking about the persistence that folks might have. Tim, thanks for the thumbs up. I see that one. Maybe we're looking at overall task engagement. A lot of the software that students use online will measure some of these things. In the future, I imagine we'll have even more robust capabilities within our computers. Maybe we can have eye tracking built in and see some of those things. Remember, any of this stuff can be used in an invasive and impressive way. It's what we do with it. And I think it's really important to consider that. So I like some of these behavioral indicators. A new project that we're doing, we just got a grant for here in Utah. We're partnering with the Engineering, Arts, and Entertainment program, which is essentially the video games program or the games program here at the University of Utah. And we're developing a virtual engagement tool for teachers that gathers kind of the readily accessible information from a Zoom meeting if you're teaching or in session. So is the camera on? Do you using a virtual background? Is that available? Are you typing in the chat? Are you using emojis? Are you unmuting or muting? And so we're going to be able to take this information and create a software application that gives feedback to teachers or therapists, whoever's using this software, to get an understanding about which students are most engaged and which students are least engaged based on these metrics. And we will work with educators to help engage students, provide more equity in the engagement strategies for those students who may need additional supports. And that's where I think many of you mentioned before, we might have a virtual check-in, check-out, or other things to support engagement. Looking at some of these other metrics, cognitive and emotional, these are all great to look at. They become harder to measure. We have to rely mostly on self-report, which isn't necessarily a bad augment to some of our more behavioral metrics. But I really like to orient ourselves to this table because it gives ideas about what we can use and think about when it comes to engagement. All right, let me keep moving forward. Why do we care about engagement? Well, what we know from the literature is that student engagement is related to their learning. It relates to their persistence in learning. The more engaged they're learning, the more persistence in learning. Learning satisfaction is really important. How good do you feel about the learning experience? Well, the more engaged learners are reporting higher satisfaction. And those who are more engaged have higher academic achievement. And that's why I think, especially if you look at some of the behavioral literature or behavioral consultation literature, we're seeing that academic achievement or on-task rates, academic on-task rates are really an important piece that we're looking at because that really speaks to how well the students are doing. So it's an important measure. Engagement is key. As you all know, if we think about social media, which we'll spend some time talking about, believe it or not, a little bit later, can actually be a really good tool for us to use. And folks who effectively use social media, I'm thinking from like an educational standpoint, these are people who have you sucked in. They really have your attention. You're so engaged with this content. And I think there's something to say about that and what we can do if we're trying to really robustly use an online environment to provide telehealth services. So my next question for you is, how are you getting students to engage online? And I'll switch my screen here so you can follow along with. And I'm just interested to hear what's worked for you. What are the kind of go-to strategies? Are there certain games? Are there, do you have to kind of be the YouTube star yourself? and kind of really get into it, I'd love to hear. Great, thanks folks who are jumping in. I'm seeing some great software. And we're going to talk about a lot of these later on today. So it sounds like some of you are off to a head start even with some of this engagement work that you're doing. Great. I'm seeing icebreaker questions. Yeah, I really had to dig deep this year and really scour the internet for ideas of good questions just for icebreakers. And it's been fun. It's been a really cool way, at least for my teaching with my students, to get to know them. But also in our practice, I think when we do groups, things like that, it's always great to have a little starter. Cool, show and tell activities. That's an awesome one. Some rewards, great. I love incentivizing the engagement piece. I think that could be really nice. Great Google Forms or other types of surveys, games. Cool. Some craft projects, awesome. I want to learn more of that. Like digital craft projects, that sounds really fun. Some whiteboards, great. I'm excited for folks to play around. We'll have some time to play around with Jamboard today, but it seems like for many of you might be familiar with that based on the responses. I've seen about 23 folks have responded so far. It's about a third of folks who are on the call, and I really appreciate that. You all are really spent some time engaging with me this morning, and it really means a lot. Jokes, great. Drawing, cool. These are all fun. I want to join your sessions. These are some really good stuff going on. All right, so let me pause there and switch my screen back to the slides so we can keep going through. And thanks everyone for jumping in. It really means a lot. So let's talk now about telehealth features and what are all these features we can use. And so for the next few slides, it's going to be very practical. It's going to be things you can do. And we're going to spend a bulk of the time this morning talking about these things. And then we'll transition that to some other topics as well. This first one I'm going to talk about is on-screen document sharing. This is one of my favorite ones. If you haven't used it, I'm sure everyone has at this point. It probably becomes second nature. But the ability to collaborate, to share information, and talk around those things is great. And this is a video just to demonstrate it with my colleague Shengtian Wu, who is a faculty member at Illinois State University and who was a postdoc in our lab last year. For which part, Shengtian? Sorry, the like University of Utah Burst Manual.
Yeah, like these infographics and stuff, you know, like for the logos, you know.
My concern about doing it not every page is if one person uses just a page of our manual, there'll be no way to know who is the person who created that. For which part? So that was a great example of just, you can collaborate, you can have conversations, you can look at similar things and really talk through, which I think is just really hard. If we were on the phone, we wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. This next one is multiple users, and this is so critical. If you're running groups, you have to have this. And just in like the past year and a half, I think, maybe it was a little bit longer, if you were like using Apple devices and only using the proprietary software of FaceTime, they didn't have a group option. And so it really kind of limited things. I think most software now uses this group option, but it's critical. This is a photo of our lab over the summer. I think someone was getting married and we were celebrating them getting married. So this is what some of that context was and why we were especially happy in this photo. The other piece is this instant messaging, or the ability to have a chat with folks. I think this is critical. I've found in my teaching, and you all probably have found this too, whether it be my teaching for graduate students, my direct work in groups or individual therapy, having this parallel modality to communicate is amazing. And we get so much more insight than maybe we would have before. I see that there might be a main conversation happening, but then simultaneously in a chat, there's this sort of very appropriate side conversation. I'm also noticing people who maybe would be more quiet or less vocally engaged. This is a kind of a more safe, more comfortable environment. You can type it out, you can read what you're going to say, you can edit your thoughts and then post it. And I think that's nice, especially I think for individuals we might serve who are more anxious to communicate or a little bit more internalized. So I would really encourage this augmentative form of communication with the vocal speech that we can do. And I'm to the point, I don't know if you all feel this way too, But I think that there's real value if we were to go back predominantly in person to teach or to do groups or whatever it is. There may be some value to have an app opened that in a group people could chat and put thoughts in or messages. I'm not sure. I think that's an empirical question that we need to ask. But I'm seeing anecdotally this value of having multiple modalities to communicate. And I think that's really important, especially if we're getting people to disclose information that's sensitive or could be potentially scary to talk about. So this chat feature, I think, is really critical. Another one that's critical, we're doing it this morning, we're recording this webinar. If you're watching this after the fact, you're seeing that feature. But our ability to record really changes the capacity for us to do certain things. When we're providing direct services as part of the work we're doing, because we have graduate students doing the group and individual therapy, we're recording all these sessions. This is really important because it allows us to do supervision, but it allows self-assessment and a permanent product of the content that happens. Now, of course, and I'll talk about this later, these are kept in very secure areas. When we do other work like teleconsultation, we typically don't record anything because we really want to feel as though we're there, and not having a permanent product allows us to really be there if we were there in person and not require the level of consent that we may have had to do if we were recording an individual or a group session. What's really nice is if we're just doing this consultative work, we're doing a virtual observation of students. As long as we're not recording anything, everything's encrypted and not saved, and it immediately disappears. And so that's been really appealing for the schools that we work with here in Utah, as far as getting buy-in, getting board consent as well as parent consent to some of these processes. So there is contrast to that I think it's important to bring up, but recording capabilities in general are really critical, and they really empower us to do a bunch of our work. And I've mentioned it in sort of some of the therapeutic context, but also if we think about consultation, and you do get that layer of consent to record, you can have parents record sessions at home. You can have educators in the classroom record and put it on, and you as a related service provider, as a school provider, can go in and actually look at it at your convenience. And I love that piece of it, because with everyone's busy schedules, you may not always be able to be at two places where there's two observations happening. But if you have a competent individual on the other end who can record a session, put it in a safe spot, a safe and secure spot, then you really have access in ways that maybe you didn't before. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the benefits of this a little bit more. But one of the projects we're doing this spring, a dissertation project that one of my graduate students, Emily Davis, is completing with the Utah Virtual Academy, is helping online learners with traditionally conjoint behavioral consultation. And if you're familiar with that model, that's extending the work of Sue Sheridan, of Tom Cradwell, of Andy Garbox, of folks who have really helped to bridge gaps between schools, families, and communities. And what we found through doing some of our preliminary work with this is that we can help support families at home with their online learners. These families are recording about 20-minute sessions like we would do if we wanted to do a classroom. And so getting that insight, getting our ability to see some of these things has been largely influential. And we're really excited about where we could go with some of these things. Okay, we're gonna have a little bit of fun for a little bit now. And I would encourage folks, if you wanna have some fun with me, if not, I'll just make a fool of myself so you all can enjoy it. We're gonna talk about virtual backgrounds. Virtual backgrounds are great. Right now, I'm not using a virtual background. I'm lucky to be in my office on campus today. And so I turned it off so you didn't have to see all of those things. But let me show you a little bit more about what you can do with virtual settings. And of course, on the screen right now, these are just some examples of ones that I think would be interesting. If you're a Star Wars fan, you may want to sit in the Millennium Falcon, and you might want to play some space chess. I think back to the beginning of the pandemic when we had our toilet paper scare and people were stockpiling that might be your virtual background. You can have some really some good times with it. And I think when you're working with students, particularly, this is a great way for them to individualize things and put themselves into your session. And it also provides some additional privacy. Let's say the students that you're working with maybe are in a space where there's multiple people, or their space isn't necessarily as accessible. Putting a virtual background gives some privacy. And allows just the person to be on there. And I think that's really important, especially if there's a lot going on within some of the environments. So let me show some of the video options that are available. And like I said, if you want to play around with me, you can. I'm going to the background and filters tab, which is in the settings. And if you're on Zoom, if you go to your video button, there's a little caret. And on the bottom of the caret, there's like an option that says video settings. So you jump in there and it'll allow you to do these things. So here's my virtual background. This is like professional Aaron when I have to like do my thing, right? And I want people to really like, take me seriously, especially if I'm at home. And then we can also do the blurred background. So maybe there is just, they're comfortable with you seeing the background, but they want it to be a little bit more blurry. And then here's a really fun one. There's the video filters. So you have the virtual backgrounds, but you could also do these really funny things. So let me show you one. You may say, it's only March, but I'm feeling festive. So I'm gonna put some Christmas lights up. You might say, I'm feeling pretty cool today. I'm gonna wear some sunglasses. How are you all feeling? Well, I'm feeling so good, I have a slice of pizza on my head. And these are all, at least through Zoom and many of the other apps, allow you to have some fun. Here's some other cool ones I wanna show you. I'm an alien now. I probably should take my glasses off, that may improve it more. And then here's a nice one. It's a beautiful hydrangea. Isn't that one nice? Maybe I'm feeling like I'm hungry, I need to cook something. So I think that these filters allow us to do a lot, I think especially with the students we work with. Let's have some fun. Let me tell you all a funny story as we're going through this. We were talking yesterday about these features in general, and how we use this work in groups and individual with our students. And one of our school counselors who we collaborate with had mentioned that the student who was using their device for the session, because the students come to school for some of these sessions still, found this new like beta feature in Zoom, which is the studio effects. And this was a really funny one. The student found the effect, and in this one you can adjust your facial hair or put lip colors on, things like that. So the school counselor found that she was unable to take off some of these things. And let me show you what was on for her. And you can kind of see I've kind of developed my shadow a little bit more here. And I can even change some of the opacity of some of these things and make them a little bit darker. So as you can tell, it can be a little bit interesting, especially if you didn't expect it, but you can have a fun time with it. So let me close some of those features. I really enjoy this. And I think to have some of that rapport building, to play around virtual background, some of these filters are a really funny way to do it. If you all are, watching media content, you saw that one with like the lawyers and the cat video, and the lawyer was like, I'm not a cat, right? Like, I'm not a cat. And everyone loved that. Everyone was laughing because it's funny. And thanks for folks who are on the call. I see you have some good mustaches here, some beautiful hydrangeas. I appreciate you all jumping in and trying to play around with these. It's a lot of fun. And it looks like where Tim's at, that's where we all want to go, I think, at some point. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for jumping in. Okay, let me close this one part here. Let's keep moving forward. Another really cool thing that you can do with virtual backgrounds, and I'd really encourage you all to do this, is if you're running group, particularly, you always probably, when you're in person, had your rules or your expectations. And so what we can do is you can upload a slide so that it could be your virtual background. And there's this new beta tested one, at least through Zoom, where you could upload a slide deck. So let's say you're prepping for your session and you put all your slides together, you can have the slides be on the background and you're on the bottom right. And this is one of my graduate students, Hunter King, who demonstrated this for us from one of his group-based sessions. So a really cool application of what you can still do with virtual backgrounds. Okay, let's take the real deep dive into virtual backgrounds. And some of you might say, this is exactly what I need. And for some of you might say, I'll never use this. And that's okay, but I wanna just get you thinking about what these tools can do being in this virtual environment. So when we take virtual backgrounds to the next level, this was a YouTube page from Dream Creative. This is like a behavior analytics service provider who works with young children. And the link's up there on the slide, and I'll make these slides available so you all are able to easily access these. But let me push play on both these videos so you can see the benefit of using virtual backgrounds with a green screen. So this is like taking it to the next level.
So for an example, I have learners that like to just transition from slide to slide and they feel like they're just magically being transported. So if right now we're just at the beach and my learner says, I want to go to the playground. I'll say, okay, ready, set, and then I have my finger here and then I go, and then I can click it right away. We're at the playground now. Oh, I want to go on a boat. Okay, ready, set, go. I'm on a boat now. So that's sort of how I run that. So I have the settings window open, I'm able to see everything, and I can just click whichever background that I would like to go to.
Okay, so that's a kind of an interesting way of just using like pre-uploaded virtual backgrounds like create some narrative and create some engagement around some of these things. And that might be, hey, during our session, like what feels the most relaxing place that I can be in? Where do you want to be? Here's another example. And this one's super cool. I think this is incredibly innovative. It's the idea of using green screen pockets. So check this one out.
Like feeding a shark or a dinosaur, anything that your learner wants. Your pocket would need to be more precisely aligned at this point because, of course, this is where the shark's mouth is. Not over here or over here. Like this one needs to be a bit more precise. So I'll show you what that looks like. So without the green screen, I made it so it's right here. So going back to the activity, it aligned.
Okay, so you can see sort of some of that alignment. And if you notice that green screen, this is one of the coolest parts I think about this demonstration, is a green plastic tablecloth that you could easily get at like a dollar store. And I think that's amazing because probably up to this point, you might think, oh, I need this big rig with this cloth green screen and it has to be this really expensive thing. No, not really. You just need that color contrast. And the reason they pick that is because it contrasts well against everything else around it. You know, we typically don't wear those colors. We may, but we typically are wearing different colors. The backgrounds of our house, I don't imagine, maybe for some of you they are that color, at least they're not in mine. So it's a nice way to actually have some of that contrast.
Like feeding.
Okay, the other piece that I want to bring up that I think is really cool and really helps support some of these engagement strategies is virtual games. This website up here is free. It's digipuzzle.net, and there's like this educational part of it. And let me show you kind of what that looks like if you were to scroll through. They have a ton of math games, science, things like that, that are really great, that I think probably are various different age levels too, which I think is really helpful. And so that's some of the options that are there. And then let me show you what it looks like if we dive in a little bit more to some of the games. I click that blue button, the games tab, and they have all sorts of really cool, interesting activities that are free and that you could easily do by sharing a screen and getting them to engage with you. Oh, let's do this. Where do you want it? Oh, tell me what spot you want to do. And of course, if you have Zoom or other similar softwares, you can give people permission in certain moments to be able to interact and click on things that might be on your screen. You can also undo that permission too, because we know that sometimes students might want to test the limits of what that could do. Let's talk more about virtual games. These are a few of the games that I really like to use. Kahoot, this is like a freely available, there's games that people upload, things like trivia, other topics, and people can log on through their own device and be able to respond. And I think that's a really cool way to get people involved. In some of our programs, we have activities that we'll either create for games or we'll use pre-existing ones. They have some awesome ones, like it might be like the Marvel trivia one or whatever kids are into. Another one is Jackbox games. That's the one on the right. These are digital games that are, you know, some of them can be more adult focused. So you want to be careful of which ones you're getting, but there's trivia and other ones that you can play games together. There's some like horror ones. So depending on the age range, they kind of have a little bit for everyone, but you definitely want to look into those before you just like give it to everyone. These are also games that we use for our lab when we're doing our parties and things like that. The last one, and for some of you might say, I don't even know what this is. And for others, you're like, yeah, I know all about this, is Among Us. Among Us, we've had a lot of success, particularly with our secondary students, as a way to build collaboration, relationship, have a little bit of fun. And if you aren't familiar with Among Us, on my next slide, I'm gonna show you the like 1-minute trailer. This is for like the new version that's coming out, but it's a really fun game, and it allows folks to really come together in this really collaborative way, despite being at a distance. So you can play with small groups, you can play with larger groups. We found a lot of success in our group-based telehealth sessions. So let me show this video to y'all.
Welcome, recruit. Get yourself acquainted with the layout of the Toppat airship. Enough slacking, go do your tasks. You may need to take a ladder to get to certain areas, or maybe just take a nice shortcut. Quit grouping up. Choose a room to start in after a meeting. Someone keeps trying to sabotage us. Stop their plan. Keep your eyes peeled. We definitely have an imposter here.
All right, and if you haven't played Among Us, it's really fun. The idea behind it is you are with a team of people going around this like spaceship trying to do these little tasks. Like you saw that one's like take out the garbage, shine this stone, connect these wires. They're like brain teasers, as well as just like simple tasks where it's about balance or kind of other tasks that you need to do. And then one of the people is actually trying to go around and kill everyone else. And then you of course you saw the person turn to ghost. When you're a ghost, you can still do some of the tasks, but you're trying to like outlive this imposter who's trying to go around and get everyone as you're trying to like viciously complete these tasks. So there's a lot of pressure. It's fun. It's building. There's some good competition. And I think, you know, particularly our youth are having a fun time playing it. So we have to, you know, really try to meet them where they're at. Another thing to consider is multiple screen sharing. With Zoom and other applications, multiple people can share their screen. So I think this is really helpful if you're running a group and someone's, you know, you want people to show their own things. This is a great way that you could pull up multiple people's screens. I imagine that not everyone has this really amazing setup like you're seeing here, but there's still accessibility to switch between screens. And I think that's nice because, you know, if I was in a room with a bunch of other people and I wanted to show you something and they wanted to show you something, we would all be able to look at each other's things. The other piece that's really important is this idea about breakout groups. And this is just what the interface would look like through a Zoom platform. But when you're looking at breakout groups, you know, you could have this where it's broken out smaller groups with students. So let's say you're working with maybe about 8 students in a social skills group. And during that, you say, okay, I'm going to put you all in a breakout. And for the next 3 minutes, I want you and a pair to practice, you know, a scenario. And you can do some of these things like you would in person, but you have some more quiet space, more controlled space. And you as the facilitator can jump into different breakout rooms, or if you have co-facilitators, and then that allows you to have some really good conversations that maybe you wouldn't have if everyone was together. Another option too with breakout groups is you might jump in with a smaller group and really hone in on some other skills. And so these two images kind of show the variation of how that could look. But I really, really encourage you all to think about innovative ways to use breakouts in your sessions. Because I think they can be really, really powerful. All right, let me pause here. It looks like Tim has a question for the large group.
Yeah, just one from the chat wondering, in addition to Zoom for the multiple screen share, if other platforms have that similar capability. And then the follow-up is how do you turn that on?
It's a great question. I'm not as familiar. I know Zoom does. I don't want to say for sure, but I feel like Teams maybe has that, but I'm not certain. And how you do that is through your features. There's like a screen sharing feature where, at least for me, when I go into Zoom, if I go to the advanced sharing options, it says how many participants can share at the same time, and you can toggle one or multiple, and then who can share. And it's only the host for all participants. So that's where you would find that feature, at least in Zoom. That's a great question. So thanks for jumping in. All right, we're getting ready for a fun little activity. I see we're coming up on the hour too, and I am a big proponent of mandatory breaks every hour on Zoom so that we can all go to the bathroom, grab a snack, stretch our legs, do what we need to do. So let me get through this digital whiteboard activity, and then we're going to take a short 5-minute break. We'll come back and we'll jump in through the rest of the content that we have. So many of you are probably familiar with digital whiteboards. Let me show you the video of what this would look like on Zoom. Essentially, you can do features like writing text, which I think is really helpful when you're trying to show information or orient people to things. You can draw with some of these other features that are here. You can use stamps. So hey, that was a great comment or that you put on there. And I think that these tools are really nice because they help us with collaboration. I love this spotlight tool. If you're showing people things, click that one so they know exactly where you're looking. Of course, you can erase and do other features along those lines as well. But the one that I really want to show you, which I have found to be, I think, like maybe the most robust digital whiteboard space is this Google Jamboard. And so in a moment here, we're going to all interact on Jamboard together, but let me get you oriented to it. So this is what it looks like if you're on Jamboard. Essentially, imagine it's like a virtual whiteboard space. This is an example that I work through with some of my colleagues who are in trauma surgery at the medical school. We've been working on virtual simulations to help teach variety of different skills to surgeons. And so we were in a competition this year, and as part of that, we had to think or some of these categories. So what was really cool is we had these orange Post-its, and as a group, we were all in different places. We were able to fill in some of this like we would in person, and that's why the context here at least talks a little bit about what I mentioned. So what I want folks to do next, and I'm going to put this in the chat for you all so you can access it, is the link to this Jamboard that I want us all to play around with. Go to this space. I'm going to share my screen just for folks who maybe can't see this. And I'm going to switch to this Jamboard for us all. Okay, so this would be the interface if you're on Jamboard. I'm seeing folks coming in. Welcome. I have instructions for you all in this Jamboard, so please feel free to jump in. I'm also going to try to make the screen a little bit bigger so I can see folks who are online with me. Thanks for keeping your cameras on for those who can. And in this virtual whiteboard, what I want you to do is pick any color for your sticky note. And I want you to put the sticky note in here and talk about your favorite dessert. And if you're feeling really brave, I know I like pictures a lot, there's a button on the left side here, and you can click for a Google search of your image. So I'm like a chocolate cake fan, so I might search for like this gooey, fudgy, delicious chocolate cake picture and try to put it up there. Try it out. And if you're feeling really, really proficient, maybe you can resize or move your picture a little bit. Oh, I love this. You all are doing great. Yum. I am getting hungry for all of these things, especially the pictures coming up here. Ooh, yum. You're all finding some really good pictures. Great question. How do you get the picture? So if you scroll over to the left side here, you see this little image, you can do a search, Google image search, and you can just type in whatever you want and it'll just pop it in there for you. So it's like the nice thing about Jamboard is it's integrated with Google. And I don't know about you all, but that's like sort of my go-to place to find information and try to search for things. Let me know if anyone needs some help. And thanks, I feel like we have like our own bakery here now. I appreciate the ice cream fans too. Yum. I think we end today at noon, so it'll be perfect timing for you all to go eat lunch, potentially after this, maybe something sweet.
Dr. Fisher, somebody commented that it said that they couldn't get in because there were too many people. Is there a capacity for this?
There may be, yeah. I've never had that problem before because I've usually used this with like my small groups, but I think maybe that's the case, that there's some limitation. So I'm sorry for folks who were not able to jump in now. You'll still have this link and this link will be live. So once less people are on it, it should be able to work through. I'll also advance my slide here a little bit, but I guess that won't necessarily help people get in. Cool. Oh, someone changed the background. Nice. This is great. That is a good looking candy apple. Yummy. All right, enough about food, right? You all know I have my feeding clinic we talked about before, so food's always at some point in the forefront of my mind. Okay, let me stop sharing this screen here for a second. The other one I wanted to show actually before I stop sharing my screen is this application of it. This was, we did our white elephant gift exchange for my lab this year. Typically, this is like a highlight that we would do in person, but this is how we arranged it. This is sort of like our rules and how the steps to actually make it. And then as I click through, we had gifts, and essentially each of those gifts were covered by a little hint. and then the people would, uncover it or open their gift, and they'd have that. So if you want to have like a celebration, one of your groups, you could do something like this, where maybe you have some prizes or things like that that are accessible. So this one, let me drop the link in for you all in the chat. This is just the viewer mode, so you'll only be able to see it, but this will allow you to at least have it as an example if you're interested in using something similar. All right, going back to our slides, and please feel free to play around with some of that while we're still chatting. All right, so that's Jamboard. Looking at my clock, we're at 9:56. When we come back from our break, because I promised you I'll take a break after that, we're going to jump and talk a little bit more about polls. You all are old pros at this because we've been doing it all morning. But let me pause here for the next 5 minutes. Let's come back at 10:02. We'll jump back in, and I'll be here for the next 5 minutes if folks have questions or want to jump in. But please do take some time to stretch, walk around, use the bathroom, grab a drink. And I'll see you all in about 5 minutes.
Aaron, I have a question.
Yeah, please jump in.
Okay, thank you. You might have said, I joined like a few minutes late, so you might have said it in the beginning, but we haven't run any small groups in our district yet. We were worried that we can't ensure confidentiality if there would be a parent listening in the background, or like what other students want to share on a, like, let's say I wanted to run a group for kids with anxiety. So, and I was just curious on how you were able to do that, run groups.
That is such a great question. And that was the biggest question that we tried to reconcile as we were trying to jump into providing group-based therapies through telehealth. We really were concerned about that. What happens to folks who are in the same living space as the students we're serving? And can they overhear these things? Are they going to jump in the call? Are they going to share some of this information? And we kind of drew this parallel, and we said, can those same things happen in an in-person group? And we talked through this and said, yeah, absolutely. All of those same things can happen. We're in a group with folks, those students can go out and tell other people. If they wanted to, they could have a device in their pocket. Maybe they record it, maybe they share it. So there's still this sort of risk of breach in privacy of information in an in-person format, or if we're remote. Now, does that risk increase? Yes, of course, because we can't control for all the things, especially if there's other adults in the space. But what we could do, and what we've tried to promote, is using headphones, having some privacy that is more immediate. I'm trying to help find spaces that are maybe more private. As the weather was nice in the fall, saying, hey, could we do a session outside? Trying to really figure out ways to accommodate people. We also make it really clear in the beginning about our expectations. Hey, there is an increased risk of these things. So it's especially important that we try to do our best to preserve the privacy that we're really trying to create. We talk to parents about these things. And I think it's just about the conversation in the same way that we would talk to students if they were in a group with us. We have not had folks who have said no to us for those services after talking about these things and going through it, but it's only a matter of time. And I imagine that every one of us will have caregivers who will say, no, I'm not comfortable with this. I don't think this is safe. Or some of the districts, they might say this is too high of a risk. But I think those are really good conversations to have with stakeholders. And for us, it was the benefit of getting good telehealth group therapy, especially during this time, outweighed the potential risk of privacy because our students were needing these services and the supports could be so beneficial. So that was at least some of our decision making and rationale going into that. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it really did. And when you send out, I thought you had said you might send this out and these slides to us in an email. Do you have examples of parent permission slips for virtual telehealth?
I sure do. And later on in the presentation, I'm going to show you all just an example of it, but I am more than happy to at least show you what we've used. And again, these are just like starting points. I would definitely vet them with your district and make sure the legal counsel is okay with it, because at the end of the day, it would probably be all of us who still get in trouble. But I think it's a great starting point. And at least, I think it has the language in there that helps make sure these things are clear.
Thank you. If you don't see me on here later, it's because I have lunch duty.
Oh, no worries. I appreciate your virtual background. It's very happy.
Yeah, you taught me this. So thank you.
You bet. Thanks for applying it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, Erin. It's Sue Doyle here. I know we've
Hi, Sue.
emailed back and forth a little bit getting you set up, so I apologize I couldn't join at the beginning, but thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a great first hour. It really flew by. I appreciate it.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to the second hour, so thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Me too. I'm just looking at the chat and I'm noticing, I think, Maria, you had jumped in with a question. When do these types of group, who can record essentially from these sessions? Is it the host or everyone? That's a great question. If we are to record these sessions, it's just the host who has the capacity to record. And but we make that really clear for our members of the groups. And it, it pops up with a little recording sign. Something that they've done here at the University of Utah, which I think is, I'm still not sure how that could translate to therapy. I don't think it's a bad idea, but they've mandated that everyone gives permission. So it pops up and says, you're getting recorded. Yes, okay, you can click that. And that's a feature that Zoom offers that you can like toggle on and off. We haven't made that standard practice, but it's something I think that I'm considering as I've seen the university move to that for some of our classes. Thanks, Maria. All right, we are at 10:02 and I am a person of my word. So I'm gonna jump in and we're gonna keep going. And we're gonna end promptly today at noon your time. So I'm an hour ahead of you if that was confusing how I said it. And I'm just looking at this one last chat. I wonder if there's also a way to limit who can take screenshots. That is a great question. I don't know, because I think the screenshots tend to be like a third-party software, like maybe not so much Zoom. Like so my Apple device, I have like the screenshot app. That's interesting. And I'm wondering if more and more people, as we get more savvy and this becomes more integrated, if we'll have some of these protections where it's like, you can't take a screenshot of that because that is protected by the software. So these are great ideas. And at least in my experience, I found that Zoom and other software, again, I just talk about Zoom because this is the one that we use, is open. So if you tell them, hey, we need this feature, they have folks who are like really interested in making it better as a platform. So I appreciate that. Let me just change my view so I can jump back in. Please keep asking your questions. So the next thing I want to talk about are polls. Polls are phenomenal. You all have been great. I think we've done about 3 so far, and I feel like I've gotten to interact with you and feel more present with you all, despite me being in Salt Lake City and you all being in various places in Wisconsin. This middle picture shows what it would look like on Zoom, and you can set these up with the Zoom app. I like to use Mentimeter. Poll Everywhere is one that I've used, but my go-to is Mentimeter. We have a subscription for that one. And that's what you've been interacting with up to this point. I just like the options, the flexibility, but a lot of this is preference and kind of your way of doing this that works for you. But polling is great because it allows people to respond. And if you have folks who are quiet in groups, I know silence is always something that my graduate students and I are always struggling through. This is a nice way to get people to start jumping in with some of that. Another software that I've used is Nearpod. Just by a show of thumbs, how many of you have used Nearpod or have worked with teachers, maybe through consultative practices, who have used Nearpod? Okay, I just need a couple thumbs up. Some folks have not. Great differentiation on the emojis. I appreciate that. Nearpod is awesome. It's a great software that you can use to do polls, but also have like digital whiteboard spaces. They have a bunch of virtual field trips, some SEL content, some learning games. So think of it as sort of like they're trying to be more of like a one-stop shop for some of these things that we've talked about before, but it just gives you one other opportunity. And for me, I'm always thinking, okay, I can use Nearpod for these things, have my digital whiteboard space for these things. And I'm trying to become fluent in like which tools are best to use in different circumstances. And that's why for me, like I'm a big Zoom fan, but if I'm going to go on a whiteboard space, I'm always going to Jamboard 100% of the time. So those types of considerations I think are really important. Flipgrid is one of my newfound favorite tools that we can use. And I use this for all of my classes, but we also use this with some of our folks in groups. And as well, this is, I think, a nice way if you want to do any follow-up in individual sessions or even getting teachers to record like asynchronous information. You can have like this back and forth but not have to be face-to-face synchronous. This is an example that we use for our school psych program. We did introductions. We were in the middle of the pandemic this year. So as our new students were joining, we had to get to know them. We wanted them to get to know us. And so what we did was we recorded, asked them to record videos about themselves, but also do a 2 truths and 1 lie, which is always a good time. And here's the example for me. This is just the interface that you're seeing scroll of what it would look like if you actually went into Flipgrid.
All right, everyone, time for 2 truths and 1 lie. I can go first to get us started. My 3 facts, or are they?
We're not getting sound.
I've been playing the drums since I was in 4th grade. I'm allergic
Sorry
to
about that.
chocolate.
Let's see what's going on with the sound. Okay, I think it was just a little bit quiet. Let me try to scroll back and put my volume up a little bit more. But if it still doesn't work, then let me know.
All right, everyone, time for 2 truths and 1 lie. I can go first to get us started. My 3 facts, or are they, are I've been playing the drums since I was in 4th grade. I'm allergic to chocolate. And I got my first computer when I was in 6th grade. You try to figure it out and comment below.
So sorry if that was a little bit quiet. I recorded with like bad sound when I first did it, but we did the 2 truths, 1 lie. Does anyone want to guess what my 2 truths and 1 lie were? I really channeled my inner YouTube star for that one. Comment below. Chocolate is the lie. You all know me too well. I do love chocolate. My mom is actually allergic to chocolate, but luckily I am not, because I love chocolate. I think that's one of my like go-tos. And if you all heard me say chocolate cake for my dessert, you probably already knew that already. All right, cool. So I really encourage you to use Flipgrid. I think it's great. I've loved it for class, but I just love this like asynchronous conversation that we can have. I think especially for any of the work that we're doing, especially around consultation, so many of the times it's just nice to be able to see an interaction that we don't necessarily have to be there for. We can see the paraprofessional working with a student, us seeing it in the moment, us seeing it 5 hours later. If we're not providing in vivo performance feedback, similarly, I think that we get the same thing out of it. So Flipgrid's a cool tool for that. Let's spend some time now talking about cloud computing and collaboration, because I think we talked about this early on as like a teleconsultation, telehealth feature, but it's one that you're probably already using and probably pretty proficient with at this point. Cloud computing collaboration allows us to store all these things in central locations, but also know that they're safe and secure. Because if you're using Teams, or if you're using Google Drive, if you're using Box, whatever it is, your institution, whether it be school districts, university, whatever it is, they are all approving and saying it is HIPAA, FERPA compliant. And that's important because now you can share all your information. It's under that level of encryption. You still as the user need to do good settings so that not everyone who's on your system can interact with all the files, having those protections within. But it's a really nice tool to collaboratively write with folks, to collaboratively put lessons together, as well as store information, videos, and things like that. One of the ways that we've built out cloud-based computing and some of the features, particularly with Google, we have the Google Education Suite, and we use that for some of our lab work, is creating some of these data tracking sheets, which I think are really, really helpful. So we're able to progress monitor, use that to make decisions. And I think at this point, this technology is ubiquitous. Everyone has access to it. Let me show you what this would look like. So you'll see kind of on this video, me scrolling through. This is every single day for a student that we work with. And the paraprofessionals who work with the student can go in, and you notice all these little boxes on the right side. There's a spot for a supervisor to talk about it. There's program notes. The parent needs to hop in. All the key stakeholders, parents, SLP, school psychologist, behavior analyst, school administrator, everyone is linked in, and we can see the data in real time as the paraprofessionals put that data in. On the beginning, there was like 10 different goals, behaviors we wanted to reduce, as well as pro-social and adaptive behaviors we wanted to increase. But I love that we can use this and monitor progress over time in this really robust way. I'm happy to share with you all, if you're interested, like a blank version of this. Essentially, it's like all the data removed. And it could be at least a starting point. But I like it because, particularly for me, what I found through this telehealth service delivery is we have to be very intentional. And I didn't mention this before, and I kind of failed to do that. But when you're doing this work, there's planning. To really do it well, you have to take time and be purposeful and have that intentionality. And I think that's been a benefit because it forces us to do those things that are always helpful. To be more intentional is the name of the game. And I think if we can do that to help our students, if that preps us more, then we're better off for it. And so I'm a really big fan. And like I said, if you're interested, I'm happy to share. Other types of systems that kind of play off the cloud storage, which is the one that I showed you just now, or other maybe more commercially available electronic reward systems, things like Class Dojo. So let me just pull my view up of you all so I can see a little bit better, just by show of thumbs or some reaction. How many of you have used Class Dojo or work with teachers maybe who are using Class Dojo in their classrooms? Great, a lot more thumbs on this one. That's super cool to see. I really like Class Dojo. I think with any software, you can use it in a way that could be oppressive, or you can use it in a way that really helps to create equity. I really like using Class Dojo as like a tool for positive reinforcement. So we're not like dinging the students, and it's really about building up and creating more community around shared expectations. Things are important to everyone in the class, and incentivizing those things through the system. And Class Dojo, I've seen, at least in the past year, has really tried to enhance their software and provide like lessons and SEL type activities and things like that. But what's really cool about Class Dojo is parents can also link into it. So if you're the teacher, you can give access. If you're the school psychologist, you can link with the teacher. You can get real-time data from teachers. And I think that's super important as we're trying to do so much with what limited time we have. All right. Let me keep moving forward. And for the next about 15 or 20 minutes, we're going to talk about direct service delivery and indirect service, and just kind of give some of that contrast and some of the success that we found in some of the work we've been doing. So with direct service delivery, it can look a variety of different ways. You might be sitting with your client, providing direct therapeutic services, and they might be in their home doing this. They may also be in their school in a certain room if they're in person, and you as the therapist may be virtual. And so there's both ends of that. And I think we start to have to think about, what is service provision going to look like as we move beyond the pandemic? I can't be at these two schools that are 50 miles apart. I have a therapy session. Well, I can do this one here in person. I'm going to do the other one face-to-face through video conferencing. And I think we'll have to start becoming more proficient in practicing getting systems in place for that. Another thing we might do, if we look at the bottom right photo, is we might have sessions where we're also providing these things virtually, but we send our clients materials. I think we should be doing more of this. Little things that we can put in the mail, if it's accessible at their school. Like I know for me, my son is a kindergartner, and he has a bag that I pick up every Wednesday with new materials for the week. You could have some of those things put in there so that they're accessible for your session. And then this picture in the middle, I mean, for me, it really just illustrates this idea that we should be flexible still with these spaces. And some of our students who we work with, they might not be able to sit still. They may have to move around. So I think just being flexible and figuring out expectations that work for you in individual sessions, and trying to shape expectations, behavior to what's really conducive, but also meeting our clients where they're at. What I think we've seen through telehealth service provision is, if we don't do that, if we impose our expectations too aggressively, I think that we lose the ability to connect and have really meaningful relationships that can yield positive therapeutic outcomes if we're doing this type of service delivery. And so those tools that I mentioned before, and everything I listed up to this point, use these things in sessions. You all know how to implement cognitive behavioral therapies or skills-based content, and working through some of the therapeutic stuff. You have great training to do that. It's taking that and positioning it within all these great technologies that exist, and practicing and getting used to it and feeling comfortable. And again, being really intentional, having the plan, here are all the things, here are my materials, my slides are queued up, my screens are queued up. And it's the same thing, for this presentation, where as I prepared, I had all my information in spots that were easily accessible so that you all don't have to see me fumbling around the technology, because I think that can be a real barrier. So think about individual services and think about the work that you can do with those tools we talked about before. Another piece, we've talked a lot about group and how you might use some of these things for group. But what we found in some of these group formats, and I think this is probably similar to what you found if you're doing this work in person, there's the social piece to it, and there's students who are interacting with one another, and there starts to be community that's developed, and there starts to be a culture within the group that happens. And so let me orient you to this graph on the right that just demonstrates some of the information we were able to collect last spring as the pandemic started, as we transitioned to virtual groups. We had 3 different students, Chris, Albert, Tim, who are listed on these 3 panels. The y-axis is the percentage of engagement, and the x-axis is the number of sessions. And so we didn't have, very strong functional control of this because we were doing applied services. We were in the middle of the pandemic, but we were able to show 3 baseline to treatment changes. And so, with caution, interpret this data. This isn't strong, definitive information, but it's very helpful to start to see where we could go with some of these things. And we're interested to replicate some of this work with tighter experimental control as you'd expect for like a peer-reviewed manuscript. So in the beginning, the therapist, us in group, we were delivering a lot of opportunities to respond, because as we know, if you're doing good instruction in a classroom, it's all about the number of opportunities to respond. And, in conjunction with that, things like a positive negative ratio to comments. But if we're looking at just the opportunities to respond, what we found was that there was some high levels of engagement for these first 2 students, but lower for this 3rd student. And what we noticed in these sessions was that this 3rd student really seemed sensitive to the attention that they could receive from peers. And as scientists, as practitioners, we said, okay, there's something here, we have to figure that out. So then what we switched to is the student delivered opportunities to respond. So what we would do is we would instruct another student to try to evoke behavior from the peers. So we would say something like, hey, Chris, can you ask Albert and Tim to name so-and-so, or to do this thing, or to talk about this therapeutic skill? And Chris would say, hey, Tim, tell me more about what you think about being aware with some of your feelings. And what we noticed is that when peers were the ones providing the student delivered or the opportunities to respond, that we saw this increasing trend that seemed to be different from our therapist delivered one. The rates for on-task behavior, for engagement for Chris and Albert stayed pretty much the same. I mean, I think if anything, we maybe saw a little bit more variability. We teased out this social engagement and engagement broadly so that we could look at some of those things separately. But what we noticed was that engagement with our activity with our group increased over time. Now, because we don't have functional control, we could say this is just maturation within the session. They're used to these expectations, they're getting better with it. And I think that could be true, but I do think that there was this piece, at least that we saw, where student provided, so really capitalizing on that peer support is gonna help create that culture and get that engagement. So I'd encourage you all to do it. Get folks involved and get them involved with each other. And that's where breakouts, whiteboards, other spaces can be really collaborative and really fun, especially if you're learning in this group context. Okay. We have about 40 minutes left. And in those 40 minutes, I want to go through a little bit about indirect service delivery, and then we're going to go through some of these practice considerations. When it comes to indirect service delivery, I want to orient you all to these images on the right. The image on the right, for all of you, are like, this is very familiar. This is our multi-tiered system of support triangle. And what kind of school psychologist would I be if I didn't have a triangle in this presentation? And what I added to this triangle, which I think is really helpful, is this idea, of course, that special education services are nested on top of our really robust multi-tiered system of support. And as we're functioning as teleconsultants, and as just to get you oriented, if you look at the top right, remember you're the consultant working with the educator or caregiver, trying to help the student. We have to be aware that we can help in multiple domains. We can help with school-wide positive behavior intervention support. My colleague, Bradley Bloomfield at Monash University in Australia has done some of this work looking at teleconsultation for some more of those like tier 1 elements. We can also look at things like consulting around tier 2. Let's help teachers get a check and check out system in place. Or we can do tier 3 supports where we maybe are doing more functional behavior assessment, behavior intervention planning, or helping with other types of services that would be really beneficial for our students. So considering all the work that we can do, this is one of the handouts that I sent you all. This is kind of a good overview of the steps. So I really want you to consider this as you're going through or providing this work. Problem-solving consultation, as many folks are familiar with, this is kind of the contemporary iteration of behavioral consultation, with, which is something that Bergen and Cradwell talked about a lot in 1990. And we've seen other iterations, like I mentioned before, with conjoint behavioral consultation, adding the work of Sue Sheridan, Andy Garbox, and others. And so let's walk through these steps. Step one for teleconsultation is going to be building a relationship with individuals, whether it be the teacher you're working with parents. And sometimes you might be able to have some of this be in person, and sometimes it's completely virtual. And what we found is you can build relationships with folks virtually if it's exclusively the format that you're working through. You can also build relationships if it's a combination. There are many more touch points that are sort of more incidental, more natural if you're kind of in person, as you can imagine. But if you're intentional and you're thoughtful, you can also do these things virtually. You just have to make time for it. Maybe you set a reminder, say, oh, let me text that teacher to just check in with them. Little things go a long way. When we're building a relationship, we have to establish trust and mutual respect. Hey, I'm here to help. I'm not here to boss you around. I'm here to make sure that you're empowered and you're feeling supported. We do this by clarifying roles, expectations, and responsibilities, and being really conscious of the power dynamic, the power differential that exists there as a consultant, as someone coming in, talking to a teacher or a parent. We want to use approachable language. We want to make sure we're not talking at a level that isolates people or pushes them away. And particularly when we're using technology, and this is really important just in general, is also this idea about culturally responsive services and thinking about cultural diversity, thinking about comfort with technology, thinking about cultural factors that maybe make folks more apprehensive about using technology. This is really, really important. And I think that if we don't dive in, if we don't acknowledge these things and talk about these things, then we can't really build a strong relationship, and we can't be responsive and create equitable spaces for our teleconsultative services. So I really encourage you all through your rapport building process is to lead with these things and be empathic, and really seek to understand the circumstances so that you can be highly effective. Step two, let's identify the problem. What's going on that we were called in for the first place, or that we have to support in general? We want to define that problem. We want to figure out what we can do to measure that outcome so that we can see change and have that improvement. We also want to explore contextual factors that may influence or maintain the problem. Are there systemic barriers that are here? Are there issues that are in the community? Are there family factors? I think there's so many things that we have to think about, risk and protective factors, that really inform so much of what's going on in these problems. And then we want to start collecting baseline data so that we can figure out if the things we're going to consult on actually improved. The next piece is step three. And in this part, we're going to analyze the problem. Part of analyzing the problem is taking information as much as you can get, record reviews, behavior observations, ABC data, anything that you can have that give you that context. And if it's helpful, you might get a release of information and talk to a pediatrician, or you might talk to a community mental health provider, or a ABA agency, or whoever it is that you have the opportunities to work with. Taking all that information, aggregating it, and then using your features, like we talked about before, screen share, things like that, to show data, show the synthesis of your review, and talk to your consultees about what you found. And then identify an evidence-based intervention through that analysis of the problem. Here are the things that are happening, here's why, here's, I think, some interventions, one or more, that would work. And if we look to some of the work of folks like Evan Dart, who's at the University of South Florida, who talked about test driving interventions. Well, let's give our consultees some opportunity to play around with elements or interventions and see which ones really feel good. Because if they're not bought into doing this work, it's going to be really challenging, especially if we're not there in person to help in similar capacities that we would. When we get to the step four, the implementation of this intervention or whatever plan that you're creating, we want to develop something written, a procedural plan that people can follow and look back to and share with others, and ensure if there's drift that we can get back to what it intended to be. When we are teaching this plan as consultants, teleconsultants, we want to use behavioral skills training. And this is our tell, show, do, I do, we do, you do. And you would review the written product, you would model the intervention. We'll get to how you do this really effectively with some of the content that we've created, because one barrier that we find is if you're not there in person, it's a little bit harder to model some of this on my little screen, right? And so we need to do a little bit more intentional work with creating visual models and other opportunities, but hang tight, we'll get there. And then last is the do piece, which is the rehearsal and performance feedback, which we know is the key ingredient. It's having people do the work and then watching them and giving them constructive, supportive, compassionate feedback to empower them to be better providers of the intervention that you've consulted with them to deliver. And like I said, we can use this through video intervention models. We've done bug-in-ear coaching. We've also uploaded recorded videos in a more asynchronous way where we can kind of give them feedback and send it back to them after the fact. So there's a lot of flexibility if we're doing this through telehealth. And then step 5, evaluate intervention effectiveness. What was the intervention implemented as planned? If yes, give them praise, commend them for their performance. If no, support any barriers. And if the problem, if we're looking at it and it gets better, great. Let's plan to maintain this intervention or generalize into other settings. And if it's not getting better, if the problem didn't improve, then it could be due to poor implementation. We want to provide additional support, and if it's due to lack of effectiveness, maybe we go back to step 3 and we think about a new intervention. So that's sort of the quick summary of this. If you are all thinking back to your problem-solving consultation coursework or class that you had in graduate training, this probably sounds familiar. It's overlaying our technology-infused version of that. Here's some of the hardware options that you can use. I'm going to advance my slides just so you can see maybe some bigger pictures of it. But some of the work that we've done, this is really the work that started off, I think in probably about 2015 or 2016. We got a grant from the Society for the Study of School Psychology, which is part of Division 16 of APA. And we were able to get some funding to help support technology-infused research that use telepresence robots. And so these are 3 of the studies that we used, that we published around this work. This was me at one of our tech conventions here in Salt Lake City called Silicon Slopes. This was a year and a half ago, right before the pandemic hit. And we were able to show some of our robots, which are shown here, the double on the bottom left and the Kubi that's on the kind of countertop up there. And through these 3 studies, we were able to use telehealth with these robots in different settings that we could move around and look around and really navigate spaces to do things like increasing student compliance with teacher instructions. We were able to teach expressive number discrimination through a stimulus fading intervention that a paraprofessional that we trained and implemented. And then we also looked at things like conducting behavior assessments through virtual functional analyses. And we looked particularly at implementer errors. So what were some of the problems or some of the errors, omissions, commissions that came up through this more virtual space, and proposed some ideas about how we might look at that. But I, for some of you who are seeing this, you might say, this is weird. I don't know. That's a great first reaction to this. But we've had a lot of success. We work with a district in southern Utah that's about 300 miles away. They have 5 of our robots, and we have graduate students who provide virtual consultation, teleconsultation for 4 different classrooms in that district, helping students who are receiving special education services. So some real application of this work as well. Let's talk a little bit about asynchronous service delivery. And this is where some of the other cool applications come in. Social media. Think about what you can use with a variety of these different platforms. Some of the ones that we use, and this is one of the projects that we've been working on through the pandemic, is our Behavior Response Support Team project, which is a collaboration with Granite School District. Granite is a large school district, one of our largest school districts in the state. It's very diverse. There's 150 languages spoken within the district. And as part of the changes that came with the pandemic, our team, which was traditionally supporting teachers with classroom behavior management supports, we needed to respond to the call of action of how do we support families as they go to remote, and how do we support teachers who are going to be doing things remotely, particularly thinking about modeling really important skills. So if you're following along with me, on the right, you'll see our infographic, those QR codes, which are those little squares with a bunch of little black and white shapes in there. If you take out your cell phone right now and hold it up to the screen, go to your favorite platform, scan the platform that you like the most, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok, and you'll find our content available. And let me just push play here so you can see what that looks like as you go through our Facebook page. We have behavioral principles, academics, routines and schedules, tackling boredom, stuff around PPE, electronic safety, social emotional learning and wellness, positive reinforcement. And all of this content is translated into 7 total languages, English plus 6 more. And we're really proud of that because that has given us the ability to really connect with families in our community and really make sure that this is applicable and accessible. So I'd encourage you all to check that out. I'm also happy to drop a link for the YouTube page if anyone's having a hard time with that. And this, of course, is just our YouTube channel. We have over 100 videos translated in these languages. So I really encourage you all to check it out for some of maybe your consultative work that you might be doing. And I think social media has a really cool application with that. Here are some of our options for virtual classroom behavior tips. We have like a few videos that are honed in just on that. And then on social emotional learning as well. Let me show you what one of those looks like.
It's important to keep students engaged during remote learning. Virtual engagement may look like how often and for how long students engage with online course material, how students think about what they are learning, and how connected students feel to their learning environment. Here are some ideas to facilitate engagement in your virtual classroom. Use prompts to spark discussion. Post regular classroom announcements. And keep lessons short. Thanks for watching.
All right, and that's our team who has developed all this content all masked up. Okay, some other stuff you can do with asynchronous content. This is something that we created because a lot of our students, especially in secondary settings, they're stressed. They needed some stuff that they could do along the way. So we had a graduate student in our program who's currently on internship, Kaylee Brennan, who is a certified yoga instructor, and she recorded a few videos. These are also available on our YouTube channel. Let me play this one, just a brief clip of it so you can kind of see what that would look like.
Okay, our next breathing technique is called ocean breath. So for this one, I want you to think about how the waves in the ocean sound. We're going to try to mimic that as we breathe. So for this one, I want you to sit up nice and tall, make sure your bottom is pressed into the ground or the chair, wherever you are. Maybe you find your hands resting on your knees or in your lap, whatever's comfortable for you. So this time I want you to just practice inhaling through your nose and exhaling through your mouth. Good job. So this next time, I really want us to emphasize our exhale to make our exhale.
Let me pause there. I'm sorry if all of you are getting into it too. I'm feeling really relaxed, but for the sake of time, I just want to give you like a little brief teaser of some of these things. We've also created some of our own like videos that we created for YouTube specifically for our secondary, our high school setting. Here's just a funny one from one of our students, Christina Omley, who is a intern in Jordan School District here in Utah.
Disguise itself, let's talk about a simple mindfulness technique to deal with these emotions. And yes, these are props, hang with me.
Rule number 1, take note of how we're feeling. Scan your body. What types of thoughts are you having? How is your body feeling in this moment? Are you using this dandelion? Like, looks all right, looks normal, but there's stuff missing. Rule number 2, we're gonna name how we're feeling. So after you scan yourself, you might recognize, ooh, I'm feeling pissed off. I'm feeling bummed out. I'm feeling lonely. Rule number 3, this part might be a little bit harder. This is when we just need to sit with how we're feeling. By sit with your feelings, we mean experience it. For certain feelings might take a longer amount of time, a shorter amount of time. Just depends person to person and what's going on.
Rule number 4, get it? Cat.
This is the part when you can make like Elsa and let it go. But wait, it doesn't mean that you can't or won't revisit how you're feeling again in the future.
All right, let me pause it there. That was a really great one that Christina created.
Disguise itself.
The last about, let's see, 10 minutes we have, I want to go through some of our ethical telepractice and some of the practical considerations. And due to the kind of limited time we have this morning, I won't be able to spend so much on it, but I want to give you at least some of the critical content. All right. So as we think about doing this, it's about competency, most importantly. And what is our professional competency to do this? Well, you all are here training with me today. And this is really important because I think we now will leave with new skills and maybe some more confidence that we can implement some of these services. We have to think about security. We have to think about privacy, things like physical environments, consent for telehealth, reported therapeutic alliance, and practical telehealth considerations. And I'm going to walk through each of those. What makes it secure? How do we make sure that what we're doing is secure? I talked about this at the beginning. Well, what we want to do is make sure that there's the HIPAA Business Associate Agreement, which all of these tech companies who are providing the technology have the ability to sign that with you. And sometimes that means that you're getting access to a licensed version of their software. So for example, on Zoom, I have the licensed version. I know because I've paid them extra, because I've signed this agreement, that I have encrypted, secure, HIPAA, FERPA compliant video conferencing that is happening with my clients. I also know, because I've signed it with Google, that I have that for my forms, for my Jamboard, for all those software that is running through those things. I also am thinking of my storage of data, and I told you this all before. Beforehand, we had to have our filing cabinet, and we may still have those things, but now with these virtual spaces, we have to be very secure with them. We have to make sure there's certain permissions. We have to make sure that not people can access them. When we're disposing data, we also have to remember that if we're deleting it on cloud storage, sometimes it's not always deleted. There's like a deleted folder where these things live. And if you truly want to delete things, there are some different layers you might need to go through. Verifying folks' identity. When you're working in a group or individual setting and they might be in a different space, we always want to make sure we can verify identity to get at some of the security issues we talked about before. Is this person there, particularly if there's camera off? Can we get some quick turn on your camera, show us you're there? Can you type something in? Maybe there's like a verification word that we would ask them to put in to show that it's them in that space. We also want to have contact information. This is important because in the event that high risk behavior happens, harm to self, harm to others, we need to know who to contact and how to support. This is one of the hardest things that we'll have as providers through telehealth space, is the physical distance of someone we might be working with who enters into a space of crisis. And because of that, we need to create crisis plans that delineate, in these circumstances, here's who we're going to call, here's how we're going to do these things. And this might sound familiar. You might say, this is what we do in schools. Yeah, exactly. We're just keeping that same intentionality into these new spaces and just making procedures for all of those things. And then of course, we talked about recording a lot before. So let me just keep moving forward. What makes it private? Well, there's a lot about the environment. I think we've talked about that. I'll get to more of this in a little bit, but also thinking about the location, the people who are around, and any content you're sharing, and just be really mindful about that. And all of these things really play into the level of privacy that you have. And if you're in a more private location, it's going to feel more private. If you're in the middle of a gym, an after school program, like a gymnasium, and you're sitting with your back against the wall having a computer with headphones on, it's less private, but maybe that's the best privacy that you can create in that moment. So there's things to consider. The people who are around, like we talked about before, as well as what you're showing on your screen. So let's jump in, because I think this one's really important, and talk a little bit about the physical environment. And I'm going to go through some of these. The clothing you wear actually plays into the experience that people have. You notice right now I'm wearing a solid colored sweater. It's a little bit cold here in Utah. We're probably going to get a little bit of snow tonight. And so for me, I picked a solid color one that's not going to take as much bandwidth. Well, I'm on campus, so we have really high rate internet, doesn't impact as much. But if you're working with families who don't have high speed internet and they're working on lower bandwidth, trying to standardize things like clothing, or a virtual background that takes away some of the background noise. Like in my office, there's pictures, there's things that are up, there are things that are taking up more bandwidth. And so the most we can do to make less busyness, that helps with it. We also want to think about the lighting. We talked about background, people, location, but the lighting that's there is really important. I don't know if you've all experienced it, but you can get that ominous backlit where you can't see the person's face and it feels like you're being interrogated and it's scary. And I know for me, I don't want to open up and be vulnerable. When I go to my own therapy with my therapist, she has very good front lighting. I have front lighting. We can see each other really well, and it feels like we're more present in our experience. So you want to get good front facing lighting. The camera position, we want to make sure that it's as favorable as possible, as flattering as possible. As you can imagine, I have a camera that's sort of eye level straight with me right now, but you've all seen that eye level where the camera is underneath and you're getting this view that it's really not flattering for anyone. And so thinking about those things, the best is either eye level or even slightly a higher, about a 45-degree angle, then you can kind of get more context of the space. Sound and audio, use headphones, make sure there's no feedback. If you don't have headphones, it's going to be a high likelihood of feedback because the sound's picking it up. And then this other piece is about eye contact. Right now, I'm looking at the camera. I'm looking at all of you. But if you were on the screen and I deviated my vision even just slightly down so I could see more, it may approximate a good eye contact, but I can still see you. And so it's really thinking about the space between the camera and the person's head. That's a key spot you could look, and you can kind of interact in a way that looks like you're still looking at them. We talked about interaction, so I'm not going to spend as much time, but I do want to jump into some of this around consent because we did talk about this. So this is an example of a consent form. that we use in some of our programs. They'll scroll through, talks about what software you use, talks about some of the risks, talks about how you should set up some of these things. And then we give step-by-step kind of task analyses. We just play to the least common denominator. We say people are great, but they lack a lot of the skills, and we recognize that. And so we build this guide, and here are the steps what to do. And then this is part of our crisis plan. That's the Safe UT app. It's an application that the University of Utah Department of Psychiatry created, and it's like a 24-hour line that people can connect with and give tips about risk, as well as get in touch for crisis support. So we use that as a really nice, accessible, free tool that's in our state, but you may have something similar. And of course, as we're going through, this probably looks like a similar form that you might look in person. What's important with telehealth consent is that you do your consent form as normal services, and here's telehealth, and here's all the stuff that's going to happen through telehealth. Could you integrate those two forms? Sure. I'd like them to have separate, because it becomes intentional. We're going to do this work, and it's going to be through telehealth. And that's just for me, maybe being more risk adverse, but I like to make sure things are really salient for individuals we work with. Okay, let's spend the next 5 minutes or so talking about Rapport Therapeutic Alliance and some of these other pieces, and then we'll jump into all the questions that you might have in the last 15 minutes. Building rapport is important. This is another infographic that we created. Pamela Cornejo, who is a counseling psychology graduate student who is in my lab, created this really awesome infographic to use. Talking about things like therapeutic space, the logistics, some of the rapport and engagement pieces. We talked a lot about this stuff, so I'm not going to go over it in detail, but thinking about these 4 elements is going to be really important. And remember, rapport is this dynamic process. You're going to have to keep watering your plant to keep it alive. You're going to have to keep providing intentional efforts to build rapport with your clients, consultees throughout this process to make this stuff work. Let's talk about some practical considerations. I mentioned the gaze angle. We need to make sure that any limitations are talked about on the front end. That's where the consent form, I think, is really helpful. What we found through some of our early research was that acceptability of this stuff increases over time and exposure, particularly with the exposure piece. So if you can get people to experience this work and try these things out in practice and get fluent, they like it, it's helpful, it provides that improvement in their practice. And that's why I think it's good not to quit after the first time. Internet connectivity is going to be a big one, making sure not only that people can access devices and high-speed internet, but thinking about the number of people who are utilizing it and what that could mean as far as like high-quality sessions. And then, of course, a backup plan. Hey, if we get kicked off the call, I'm just going to give you a call on my phone. We'll just talk on the phone for today. Those kind of things can be really helpful. And APA has some great practice guidelines for you all to consider. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through some of these last questions. These are like, what are the barriers that you've experienced? But I want you to maybe think on some of those. If you want to share in the chat with other folks, please feel free to do so. I want to leave you with a few of these ideas, and then we'll open it up for questions. Some technical considerations. Do your research. You all are here learning with me today. Keep doing that. It's going to keep changing, and we have to keep learning and being brave to practice, make mistakes, and get better at this work. I'm learning every day. I'm improving my practice, my training, and I think with technology, you have to have that really open mindset to want to learn and to grow. Consult with your IT specialist. They're your like best experts for all these things, and they should be able to help and problem solve some of these things, and maybe build some new relationships with folks who you maybe didn't have to interact with or dreaded interacting with maybe before. I mentioned doing practice. Doing test calls is always great. I think just to work out any of the issues that could arise. But being patient, I think, is such a key piece. Being patient with yourself, with your clients, their consultees. Lead with compassion. Be a really thoughtful person in this process, and remember what it's like to learn a new scary thing, particularly with technology, which for whatever reason I think can be really aversive for people. And they'll feel like they're going to break it. They feel like something can go wrong. That radical compassion that you can bring, I think, can go a long way. And learn new ways to engage your clients, which hopefully after today you figured out at least a few new that you can put in your toolbox. I want to leave you with this last piece. I imagine as all of you as school providers and working to support students in schools, you provide some level of supervision, or there's an opportunity. In our text that we edited in 2019, myself, Ty Collins, Evan Dart, and Keith Radley, technology applications in school consultation, supervision, and school psychology training, we have some sections on telesupervision. And I'd really encourage you all to check some of this out. Things to consider are recording and sharing, digital feedback that you can provide as a supervisor, electronic records, and of course, supporting telehealth training. It's something that we've been doing here at the University of Utah for a while, but isn't necessarily ubiquitous in school psych training programs, and I think would probably be pretty limited. Maybe now people are starting to think about it. So I'd encourage you to check that out. And so as we wrap up today and open up for some questions, like I mentioned, our text has some great content around this. If you scan the QR code that's on this slide, you'll get chapter 1, which is all about teleconsultation for free. And we're grateful for Routledge to opening access up for folks who might be interested. My email address is up on this slide as well. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to talk about these things, problem solve it. I geek out on telehealth, and I love talking about it with people who are interested in the same way. Also, feel free to look at some of the work we're doing with our lab. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I have some amazing people doing great work with our community across the state, and we'd love to share some of that with you all if you're interested. And if you're on social media, we have some presence on social media. Follow us on Twitter or other platforms. That's our handle. But let me pause there and open it up for any questions, thoughts, concerns you all might have.
I'll go ahead and get started while people are thinking. One question that kind of popped in as you were going through all these different tools and resources was thinking about, and I know you mentioned your kindergartner, I have a kindergartner as well, thinking about when they're doing things virtually, that they have access to essentially the entire internet. So I'm wondering, in terms of engagement, how, if there's strategies for like narrowing that engagement or ensuring that they're engaged in the things that they should be or that you want them to be.
Tim, that's such a great question. And I think one that we probably all struggle with, because there's so many competing interests and we can be on our devices. And up to this point, we've probably gone on the honor code, right? Like just, hey, remember, we're going to be present here. I think it's about teaching those expectations on the front end. What I mentioned, our conjoint behavioral teleconsultation project, and we've had some of that with some of our students. Like their target behavior was not going on YouTube essentially during asynchronous content and staying on the right screen. And so we were able to be there and record through those sessions to look at some of that. And the parent would come in on like a differential, like a certain schedule of reinforcement to provide differential reinforcement for engagement, not being on YouTube, right? So they come in like on average, every 5 minutes, and they'd pop in and provide some praise if they weren't. And so things like that, I think, are really fruitful. I'm hoping as technology continues to increase, as we get more buy-in for online teaching for students who prefer that, we can develop tools, like I mentioned before, that can be more informative. And I can give prompts that can, maybe, an avatar pops up on the screen and says, hey, like, come back and see the teacher. They really want to connect with you. And, some of those things that can help to augment the teacher's work. And I think we've just scratched the surface, but you're right, Tim. I mean, I think that's the issue. And we need to create reinforcing environments that encourage students, that motivate students to stay with us. And that's hard work. Like I mentioned, you have to channel your inner YouTube star. And it's kind of silly to say, but I really find that's the truth. And the more exciting, the more effusive I can be, it really helps keep people engaged. But there's still, of course, those barriers, like you mentioned. Sometimes I can't compete against the YouTube videos that are out there. And folks, remember, if you feel more comfortable, jump in with the chat. I think there's some great activity going on in the chat, and I'd love to answer any questions that pop up over there as well if you're not feeling like jumping in. I'll wait like a couple more minutes, and then if we have some extra time, I'm going to go back to some of those questions that I had in my slides, and I'll ask you through that format. So let's reserve maybe the next couple of minutes for folks who want to jump in, and then we'll go back to those last 2 slides and wrap up for today.
Well, with such a shy crowd, I'll go ahead and jump in with another one I had. I was curious towards the beginning when you talked about some of the different tools that you use, and you talked about mHealth or apps. I'm wondering if we're at a place where people can kind of look into sort of the evidence base or research base in terms of their effectiveness, or if those things are new to the point where there just hasn't been much research done on their effectiveness?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I've seen a lot of increased amount of publications around mHealth, particularly for anxiety management, kind of the more common symptomology. And there's been some reviews. I can't remember the author offhand, but it was like a prevalent author in the field who looked at sort of a review of commonly downloaded, the most commonly downloaded applications within these within like these app stores, and seeing which ones had the best evidence. So I know there's some initial stuff out there. But you have your finger on the pulse, Tim. I mean, we have to also figure out what are the level of effectiveness of these things, which ones have the biggest bang for our buck, are they free, are they subscription based? Because there's a lot of apps that are out there, and a lot that I think, you know, people would say, oh, this seems good, I'm going to use it, but does it actually create behavior change? I think that's a really important piece to this. And another piece too that made me think of that is, at least in our lab, we have a staff computer scientist who's an undergraduate student in the computer science program, who works as an assistant developing kind of applications through software that we might have, Excel, Google Sheets, things like that. So I'd encourage you all, I don't know if this is something that's accessible, but in your districts, it may be helpful to have a computer scientist on staff who can create more customized data collection tools, or other systems to streamline the process that maybe some apps don't even have right now. I think the problem that I always run in is I want something a really specific way for me, and some of the apps approximate those things but don't always do all the things. And so I think that's where, if we can create our own, and I think we're at a place now where computer science has progressed in so much where I think we can, and I think someone with you know, pretty solid foundation can help support some of the tasks we do.
Yeah, question in the chat. Somebody's wondering how they can find your Facebook group.
Yeah, great question. If you, for the UTech lab, let me just find it over here real quick. I'll put the link in for you all. Oops. All right, there's that Facebook link in there for folks who are interested.
And one that came up in the chat earlier, and now I'm seeing it again. There's questions about, I think you had mentioned it was with a grant regarding the specific measurement strategy or tools for engagement.
Absolutely, yeah. So for that one, we're in the development process of it. The application should be done this spring, and we're going to test it out in the fall with some of our online students who are in our community. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to present the data from that at NASP in either 2022 or the year after. But stay tuned for more information on that. I hope it'll be a really useful tool. And if folks are maybe interested in it, reach out, and there might be some opportunities for us to collaborate for maybe some of the students that you're serving as well.
All right, I think we got about 5 more minutes, and I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. So if you wanted to go back to yours,
yeah,
good time to wrap up and do some reflection.
That sounds great. Thanks so much. So let me just share this last slide with you all, and then we can wrap up for today. I just really kind of want to gauge where you all are at after this presentation. Okay, so for this last slide, I'm interested, are you considering any telehealth applications to support your practice? There's 4 options: individual teletherapy, group teletherapy, teleconsultation, asynchronous telehealth. You can select more than one, but I'm just interested to hear what kind of resonated with you all and where you feel like you might want to do some of this practice afterwards. Great, thanks folks for jumping in. It looks like based on folks who have responded, we have maybe about 25% of folks responding so far. The majority of you are saying individual therapy, definitely wanting to do this. That is excellent. I think there's such a great application with this work. And it looks like pretty evenly distributed across the rest. But I'm excited to see so much with asynchronous telehealth, because I think that's like I mentioned, an untapped area where we could have a lot of exciting results. Let me keep this up here for about 30 more seconds. I will stop sharing my screen and we can wrap up for today. All right, thanks everyone for responding. And like I said, thanks everyone for your time this morning. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for being so participatory. It was a pleasure to see and meet all of you, especially those who were able to turn on your videos and see your faces today. I hope we get a chance to interact at a future in-person event, maybe NASP or some other similar conference. But thanks again for your time and for being here this morning.